American capitalism did great until the U.S. government corrupted it. You know, we had a vibrant free market economy under a gold standard when we had honest money. We had a thriving middle class. We had an economy that really was the envy of the world. We built a standard of living that was unmatched anywhere else in the world. The problems really started when government started to grow.
In some capacity, do you ever see this spending being justified based on current events?
Well, first of all, you know, the debt continues in good times as well as bad. We never have any surpluses when times are good to pay off the deficits we incur when times are bad. But I want to correct a couple of mistakes that you made earlier on with the debt. First of all, the debt to GDP, it's actually 125%, not 105%, because the 105% doesn't count the debt held by the Social Security Trust Fund. So when you count all the debt that's outstanding, it's 125. But that doesn't even tell the whole picture, because you have to look at the state government debt and all the municipalities, because everybody is looking at the same tax base to repay the debt. So when you measure all government debt in the United States, you're looking at 140%. 445% of GDP, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, because it doesn't count any of the unfunded liabilities of the United States government. Those are commitments to pay things like Social Security or Medicare benefits or guaranteed student loans. And when you add all that together, you're talking about several hundred times the GDP of how much we've run up in debt. And the problem, contrary to what everybody is talking about, the problem isn't the debt ceiling. The problem is the debt. The problem is we keep raising the ceiling, so we keep on piling on more debt.
But the question is, what are really the negative, the downsides of holding all of this debt? Because it does seem like there's a lot of give and take in this.
Well, the debt is a huge problem. It doesn't help capitalism. It interferes with capitalism, because what happens is the government is taking resources away from the private sector and diverting them to public spending. And this undermines capitalism. It undermines savings and investment and all the things that we need to grow our standard of living. The problem is much of this debt now is being monetized by the central bank. The Federal Reserve prints money to buy up all this debt. And all that is levying a massive inflation tax on the economy. And this is only getting started. Prices are going to explode in the United States for all manner of consumer goods, especially goods relative to services, because the American economy, after years and years of deficits crowding out private investment, we are completely dependent on the productive capacity of the rest of the world. We are running record trade deficits. Just yesterday, we printed the largest monthly trade deficit in U.S. history, better than $73 billion. Those deficits are going to keep getting higher and higher. And eventually, and I think relatively soon, the value of our money, the dollar, is going to collapse. And all the prices of the imported goods are going to be going up much faster than they are right now. American capitalism did great until the U.S. government corrupted it. You know, we had a vibrant free market economy under a gold standard when we had honest money, when we didn't have a federal income tax or Social Security tax. We didn't have any of these types of spending programs that we have today. And we had a thriving middle class. We had an economy that really was the envy of the world. We built a standard of living that was unmatched anywhere else in the world. The problems really started when government started to grow and started to impose more regulations and more subsidies and more government spending, and the Federal Reserve came around. So these problems were not created by capitalism. They were created by government's interference with capitalism. And every time government tries to solve the problems that they create, they make those problems even worse.
And worrying about the government's behavior is frankly identifying the wrong problem.
Yeah, the problem was the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and it was their easy money policies in the latter part of the 1920s that inflated that stock market bubble. And when it popped, what created the Depression was the interventionist policies of Herbert Hoover and then Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That's why we had a depression, is because we had too much government and we had a central bank. If we didn't have either, then we wouldn't have had a depression at all.
All right, I know we've got a lot to talk.
We wouldn't have had the stock market bubble. You can shake your head, but that's the fact.
Global debt now stands at a whopping and record $296 trillion. But what's really interesting is that almost 10% of it, or $19.5 trillion, came about just during the coronavirus pandemic. Well, prior to the pandemic, the world's debt to GDP ratio rose 356% in 2020. up 35 percentage points from where it stood in 2019. That's according to a new report from the Institute of International Finance. It also found that countries saw their economy shrink and they issued an ocean of debt just to stay afloat. But now, in the battle against COVID, governments around the world are now more indebted than at any other point in modern history, even surpassing World War II.
Could this global debt issue result, or should it for that matter, result in a destabilization of fiat currency so much that governments and citizens will be forced to actually rely on other means? You often talk about the gold standard. Obviously, on this show, we regularly talk about cryptocurrency as an alternative to fiat. What do you make of all of that?
Well, certainly, first of all, while it's true that governments can certainly get away with having too much debt for a while, and some, can do it for a long while, no government can do it indefinitely. There's always going to be a day of reckoning. But the important thing to look at, too, with the debt is, why do we have so much debt? I mean, it's not an accident. You have global central banks led by the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates artificially low. And it's because interest rates are artificially low that there's so much debt. And the problem, too, with the debt is that it's not productive. You have individuals borrowing money to buy consumer goods. You have corporations borrowing money to buy back their overpriced stock. You don't have productive debt where we're investing in plant and equipment that is actually generating real income to service and retire the debt. You have this gigantic speculative bubble. You have asset bubbles all over the place. None of this is a byproduct of capitalism. It's all because of the failure to have capitalism. If we had capitalism and sound money, we would have much higher interest rates. We wouldn't have all this debt. We'd have a much more prosperous economy. But to answer your question, yes, all of this is leading to a currency crisis that will begin in the United States as both a sovereign debt crisis and a U.S. dollar crisis. And it will unleash, rampant inflation throughout the world. And ultimately, a lot of this debt is going to be inflated away. I mean, the debt can't be paid. And so most governments don't have the integrity to honestly default, and it's going to get wiped out through inflation. And then where we go in the aftermath of that is difficult to say. But the world is going to go through a very, very difficult period because a lot of these paper wealth is going to get wiped out. So a lot of people that think they have money invested in bonds, government bonds, corporate bonds, whatever they got, they're going to find out they have very little because the purchasing power is going to be eviscerated because the cost of living is going to surge, and they're locked into the paper and they don't have any way to pay the higher costs.